Assalamu alaikum, students. How are you? I'm fine, thank you. As we were talking about in the last sitting, different all about mass communication, and we started from the books. Books undoubtedly is the first organ for mass communication. Before books, in fact, there was no means available to mankind to carry its ideas, feelings, observations to some distance. You can talk when there was a gathering, and writing was there, as we find it from the old civilizations. Writing was there on stones, on wood, and on some metal sheets as well. But that was not possible to carry those writings and whatever you call the script, the caricatures or the signs or symbols, they were there. But it was not possible to carry them to other places or to other people because they were very huge. Obviously, the stones were so huge, and it was not the time when you would have good transportation. So, whatever you wrote somewhere would remain stuck on that particular place. Well, if the visitors were coming, they can see what the symbol is, they can read what the word is. But communication, it doesn't come in the area of mass communication. You can communicate to a very fewer number of people in a limited society. But when came books, and as we talk about books, we are more particular about when these handwritten books, manuscripts, were available from 6th or 7th century onward to 13th century. We categorize this area because in this area we find quite a few number of books in most parts of the world. You would find these books coming in from Egypt, from parts of Europe, and parts of South Asia. You would also find books from China. So in this part, this 600-700 years, from 7th century to 13th century, you would find books. But what content these books carried? That is an interesting question. Generally, these books were concerned about the religion of the people, since it was a difficult job. It was a tedious job to produce a book. First, the paper or the material on which you could write something was not of very high quality. And secondly, all those facilities were not available which are essential to write a book. So the people who were supposed to handle this assignment, they would continue writing a book. It may take them years to produce one book. Another problem was that you cannot have a copy of the book, exactly ditto, because it was handwritten. If you are writing it again, you are different. In fact, you are supposed to produce a little different book in your writing style or somewhere, because by writing with your hands, even today, you cannot produce exactly the same impression. So was in those old days. So a book produced was supposed to be something very costly. And that was one reason it was opened to fewer number of people. I would say few privileged people who would have access to these books. Ordinary people perhaps would never think of going to these monasteries or these areas where the books were lying and go through the books. But generally, since the books carried religious content, people were already familiar, and there was nothing new in a book. Once you are familiar with the content of book, आपको पता ही है कि किताब में क्या है, तो ये इंटरेस्ट भी थोड़ा कम हो जाता था कि आप फिर जाके वो किताब पढ़ें. उस किताब में तो वही है जो पहले का लिखा हुआ था, तो दोबारा पढ़ने का फायदा. So that would also keep people from finding new books. It was only in the 13th century and from 13th century to 15th century, as we make a category of in a history, this was the time when we find that in different civilizations, in Europe in particular, I tell you, more books were produced, handwritten, which were concerning some other than religious matters. They were not the Bibles all the time. They were now talking about the political life, the social hazards, the economic growth, and a bit of a scientific work. Those were the books which were then, and that created an interest because now they were talking something different from religion. And when came the printing press in the middle of the 15th century, what is very noticeable that there was a great acceleration to the production of books. As we quoted an example, in first 50 years of the printing press available, the number of books produced equaled number of books produced in 1,000 years before the printing press. So that was the thrust of having books. They were published because the market was available, because the interest of commoners was there. If you find more books written on different topics. So there was quite an interest on the book. And with the help of books, there was a great breakthrough in the area what we call mass communication. Once books were available, and particularly after the printing press, when the printing technology was available, when the books were available, they were handy, they were small in size. These are the olden books. They were huge in size and they were quite weighty. They had a great weight because they were, you have so much illuminations over there, you have so much decoration over there, and the huge size that would be suggested for a book. But when you have a printing process available, now this is the printing process has a limited size for the printing something on the paper. So that also helped reduce the size of the book, weight of the book, and so is the cost of the book. So when all these factors joined together, book was a handy thing to have. Now, people from middle classes or from lower middle classes, they could afford to get one. And gradually, it became so cheap that perhaps everybody was able, earning whatever the bit the person was, they were able to buy a book. So by the 17th century, the books were all around the world. There was hardly a part in the world where books were not available because printing presses were available. They were there in America and they were all over the Europe, in the Muslim world, in Chinese, in South Asia. Printing presses had already dispersed all over the world. So were the books. So a breakthrough in mass communication was made possible. And books, as I said earlier, undoubtedly is the first organ in mass communication, which afforded this opportunity to different people, people from different races, people from different areas, people from different clans, tribes, to have a book produced by someone else. And so there was an exchange of ideas. That, in fact, was the beginning when the world, in fact, was moving close to each other. Because now people were able to understand. For instance, in the scientific world, you would find a scientific discovery of some idea or some theory was made in Italy. And within some time, some other person in England or in Germany or in France or even in America was working on the same idea, on the same thing, and they were able to share their knowledge. As we were talking about the invention of radio, you would find that scientists from different parts of the world, as far as in South Asia to somewhere in Scotland and in America and in Russia, they were working on these same, what now we believe, electromagnetic waves. They were knowing the potential of these waves, which would do miracle someday. And miracle was then done as Marconi was able to put all these things together and produce a device we call radio. There were other scientists as well. But this is how the books helped. A person observed something, wrote something in detail, and sent the book across. And very many people went through the idea, and they found that it was interesting because they were also working on this idea. They just pooled their knowledge together. So that was the great advantage of having this mean of mass communication. This organ we call books were a great help to humanity. And as we talk about the books and the availability of knowledge, I would say, to different parts of the world, what we notice next, students, is so interesting. And it was the birth of newspapers. Although not in the sense we find newspapers these days, but there was a feeling that why not? As we are producing and publishing more books, why not to have some arrangement in the area of printing where we can have regular publications? There was a strong feeling. You see, before printing press, there was a great thrust on having more books. And once there was a breakthrough in having this printing process technology available, the publications then knew no limit. There was so much of publishing work going on all around the world. So the feeling to have a regular publishing of some matter was but natural. And it materialized soon when people in different parts of the world started doing their bit on irregular basis. They would publish some handout, some broadsheet on some given topic. It was more for the fun's sake. You are having something published and in fact distributed to your dear ones and near ones, and you are enjoying. Your ideas are now read by so many people, although they were like on a leaf like this. They were written on a broadsheet, and you were able to give this broadsheet to your friends, to your family members, to your cousins, and then they were discussing the idea put on these broadsheets. It was a fun. But this fun was soon to assume the shape of something so great in the coming years that a whole industry was then based on this attitude of publishing things again and again on various topics. If we give a glance to different publications in the early times, we find that somewhere in 1500, you see, it is hardly 50 years when the printing press was available, that we have in Venus, we have this regular publication in the form of pamphlets. You may call them broad news sheets, were a single leaf where you would have these things published. But it was in 1500. If we see in a historic perspective, we would see that soon after this printing technology available, there was this change of bringing out this. But again, as far as a regular publication in the form of news is concerned, it took some time. For almost 70, 80 years, people in various parts of the world, they continue printing a news sheet here and a news sheet there. But none could assume a very regular feature and could mark a change in the printing matter until 1690, when we had a newspaper, Public Occurrences. Well, it sustained for a while. It sustained for a very small time, not even a year, because as is usually happened with most publications later on in different parts of the world, it started publishing something very offensive to the rulers. And rulers, آپ جانتے ہیں رولرز کی جو ایک سائیکی آل اوور دا ورلڈ از اے گلوبل فینومینن، اور ماضی میں تو یہ بہت زیادہ تھا. جب کالونیل پیریڈ تھے، جب منارکیز کا زمانہ تھا، جب بادشاہوں کا زمانہ تھا، تو وہ یہ افورڈ نہیں کر سکتے تھے. جمہوریت نام کی تو کوئی چیز نہیں تھی. جتنی تنقید آج کل آپ دیکھتے ہیں حکومتوں پہ اور حکمرانوں پہ اور وزراء پہ، ایسا پہلے نہیں تھا. آپ بادشاہ کے خلاف، حکمران کے خلاف کوئی بات انڈائریکٹلی بھی نہیں کہہ سکتے تھے. They would not like this. تو جب یہ پبلیکیشن سامنے آئی پبلک اکرنسز 1690 میں، تو بہت جلد یہ گرفت میں آ گئے اور حکومت نے اس کو بین کر دیا. اس کے بعد یہ سلسلہ چلتا رہا. بوسٹن میں نہیں، امریکہ میں ہی ہم یہ کہیں گے کہ ایک نیوز لیٹر کی فارم میں، بلکہ اس کا نام ہی نیوز لیٹر تھا. 704 ایک امریکہ میں ہی ایک پبلیکیشن جو تھی سامنے آئی. بٹ اگین یہ کوئی بہت زیادہ دیر سسٹین نہیں کیا. اخبار کی شکل میں جو چیز ہمیں نظر آتی ہے، جو سامنے آئی 1705 میں انگلینڈ میں، نیو انگلینڈ میں کورنٹ، نیو انگلینڈ کورنٹ اس کا نام تھا. ایک اخبار جو ہے وہ سامنے آیا، اور یہ اخبار کافی عرصہ تک قائم رہا. اور اس اخبار کی جو ارلی کاپیز ہیں، وہ بہت ارلی تو نہیں، جو دا ڈے اٹ پبلشڈ وہ والی کاپیز تو نہیں ہیں، بٹ فار ویری ارلی ایئرز کاپیز آر اسٹل اویلیبل اینڈ آر دیئر ان دا ویریس میوزیمز ان یورپ. سو وی کین ہولڈ دس دا نیو انگلینڈ کرنٹ ایز دا فرسٹ ریگولر پیپر وچ سسٹینڈ. There were other papers، اخبار اور بھی نکلے تھے، لیکن یہ وہ اخبار تھا جو کچھ عرصہ جو تھا اس نے سسٹین کیا. پھر اس طرح اور اخبار نکلتے رہے، پھر اور مختلف کیفیات پیدا ہوتی رہیں. اخباروں کے حوالوں سے مختلف جو کنٹروورسیز تھیں وہ سامنے آتی گئیں. جیسے 1733 میں ایک ایڈیٹر تھے پیٹر زنگر، ان کا ایک اخبار تھا نیو یارک ویکلی. یہ پہلا واقعہ ہے اسٹوڈینٹس جس میں ایک ایڈیٹر کو جیل بھیج دیا گیا. پہلے تو یہ اخبار بند کر دیتے تھے کہ آپ نے کوئی دیکھا کہ ناپسندیدہ چیز جو ہے وہ اپیئر ہو گئی تو آپ نے اخبار ہی بند کر دیا. یہ پہلا کیس ہے 1733 میں جب مسٹر زنگر کو جیل جانا پڑا اس لیے کہ انہوں نے کچھ ایسی چیز جو تھی وہ پبلش کر دی تھی وہاں پہ. پھر 1798 میں آپ نے یہ دیکھا کہ سیڈیشن ایکٹ جو تھا وہ لاگو کیا گیا اگین امریکہ میں. اس ایکٹ کا وجود سامنے آیا تقریباً کوئی سن 1800 کے قریب لگ بھگ اس کا وجود ہمارے سامنے آتا ہے. اور ہم دیکھتے ہیں کہ گورنمنٹ نے ایک یوں سمجھیے کہ پابندی کا سلسلہ جو ساری پبلیکیشنز کو بے لاگو ہو سکے وہ سامنے لے کر آئے. اور اخباروں کی گروتھ جاری رہی، مختلف دنیا کی جگہوں پہ اخبار نکلتے رہے. لیکن ابھی بھی یہ اخبار جو تھے ہر آدمی کی ایکسیس میں نہیں تھے. اس کی ایک پبلیکیشن کاسٹ تھی، ظاہر ہے جب پیپر کی اویلیبلٹی اتنی نہیں تھی جتنی آج کل ہے. اخباروں کی سرکولیشن بہت لمیٹڈ تھی. جیسے آپ یہ سمجھ لیجئے کہ کوئی لے کے چند ہزار تک. لیکن انگلینڈ میں 1830 میں ایک بہت ٹرم مشہور ہے، اس کو کہتے ہیں پینی پریس. پینی جیسے آپ سمجھتے ہیں کہ پاؤنڈ کے حوالے سے پینی آپ سمجھتے ہیں کہ پیسہ آپ جیسے سمجھ لیجیے. ایک پھر اخبار جو ہے اس کی قیمت نکلی 1 penny. And here again there was a breakthrough in taking newspaper to the masses as far as this economic line is concerned, that now the paper, the daily, the newspaper was available to an ordinary people. They could buy it. Penny press, the term was very popular and it was introduced in 1830 in England. اور اس کے ہوا کہ پوری دنیا میں چونکہ ظاہر ٹیکنالوجی جو تھی وہ ساری جگہ پر اویلیبل ہو جاتی تھی, ٹرانسپورٹیشن بڑھ چکی تھی, بحری جہاز اس طرح کے بن گئے تھے کہ جو زیادہ سپیڈی تھے اور زیادہ تیزی سے وہ فاصلہ کور کر لیتے تھے, تو جلدی ہی جو ٹیکنالوجی تھی وہ مختلف جگہوں پہ پہنچ جاتی تھی. اور اس طریقے سے پھر جو پینی پریس کی کاپی کرتے ہوئے دنیا میں جو اخبارات کی قیمت تھی وہ کم ہو گئی. اس سے پہلے اخبارات کی قیمت کا جو ہے فرق تھا اور ہر شخص کی اویلیبلٹی نہیں تھی کہ وہ اخبار کو اسٹال سے جا کے خرید سکے. لیکن پینی پریس کی ٹرم آنے کے بعد اور ایکچولی پرائس کم ہونے کے بعد اخبار جو تھے ان کی پھر میس سرکولیشن شروع ہو گئی. پھر ان کی سرکولیشن جو تھی وہ ہزاروں سے بڑھ کے لاکھوں میں جانا شروع ہو گئی اور بہت ساری ڈیولپمنٹ ہوتی رہی. 1864 میں اب آپ یہ دیکھ لیجئے کہ اٹ از just the third quarter of the 19th century جب ٹیلی گراف وجود میں آ چکا تھا, اور یہ وہ سال تھا جب اخبارات نے ٹیلی گراف کی فیسلٹی استعمال کرنی شروع کر دی. اس سے پہلے تو یہ ہوتا تھا کہ خبر کے لیے آپ جو اپنا سٹاف ہوتا تھا اخبار جس کو امپلائی کرتے تھے, اخبارات کے رپورٹرز ہوتے تھے اور جس کو وقائے نویس ہم لوگ کہتے ہیں. وقائے نویس پہلے زمانے میں بادشاہوں کے درباروں میں ہوا کرتے تھے, کافی پہلے کی بات ہے یہ. وہ مختلف شہر کے واقعات لا کے وہ کورٹ کے حوالے کرتے تھے, ان کو وقائے نویس کہتے تھے. لیکن بعد میں بھی جب اخبارات کے رپورٹرز آئے تو ان کو وقائے نویس کی ٹرم جو تھی وہ چلتی رہی, رپورٹرز اخبارات کے آئے. یہی اخبارات کا مین سورس ہوتا تھا کہ وہ جا کے مختلف واقعات جو تھے اس کو لے کے آتے تھے, پھر وہ رپورٹ کرتے تھے, پھر وہ چھپتے تھے. اخبار ایسے نہیں تھے جیسے آج ہم اس کو سمجھتے ہیں. جنرلی اخبار جو ہوتے تھے وہ 2 کالم میں ہوتے تھے اور 2 صفحے کا یا 4 صفحے کا اخبار ہوتا تھا. جو پرانے اخبار ہیں جو ہمیں آج سے 200 سال پہلے یا 250 سال پہلے جو اخبار اویلیبل ہیں دنیا میں, 2 کالم میں وہ ڈیوائڈ ہوتے تھے اور جو چھپائی تھی وہ بہت اچھی نہیں ہوتی تھی. آپ بمشکل اس کو پڑھ سکتے تھے کہ یہ کیا لکھا ہوا ہے. فونٹ سائز بہت مختلف ہوتے تھے, بڑے فکسڈ قسم کے 8-9 فونٹ سائز ہوتے تھے, اسی میں وہ سارا چھپتا تھا. اور پرنٹنگ کا جو پروسیس تھا وہ بھی اتنا ہائی کوالٹی نہیں تھا. تو پرانے اخبار اگر کبھی آپ دیکھتے ہیں تو یو وڈ فائنڈ کہ اٹ واز ہارڈ ٹو گو تھرو دا ٹیکسٹ آف ویری اولڈ پیپرز, سم 200 years or 250, say something like 250 years ago. The papers which are available in different museums and different libraries, it's not very easy to go through the text. Not only that, some of the obsolete words were used over there, but again, the printing quality was not very high, the paper quality was not very high, the fonts were not available, and the division of the matter was not done the way it is done today. So it was little difficult to go through the text and find what actually was there. But in those days, that was the height of technology, and that was what was available to the people. And people, I believe, must have enjoyed availability of newspapers in those times. لیکن ہم یہ کہہ رہے ہیں کہ اس زمانے میں 2 کالم کا پارٹیشن ہوئی ہوتی تھی, ایک ہاف پیج کی اور ایک ہاف پیج کی اور 4 پیج کا وہ اخبار ہوتا تھا. لیکن 1864 جیسے بھی ہم نے کہا کہ یہ وہ سال ہے جب اخبارات میں یہ انٹروڈیوس کروا دیا گیا کہ وہ ٹیلی گراف سروس کو انجوائے کر سکتے ہیں. 1848 ایک ایسا سال ہے اخبارات کی دنیا میں جب پہلی دفعہ نیوز ایجنسی کا وجود آیا. مطلب ایک ادارہ ہے, ان کا اخبار کوئی نہیں, لیکن وہ ساری جہان کی خبریں اکٹھی کر کے مختلف اخبارات کو پرووائڈ کرتی ہیں. یہ ایک ہم چھوٹا سا دیکھ رہے ہیں کہ جو اس کا ایوولوشنری پروسیس ہے وہ کس طریقے سے ہوا, وہ جاری رہا. اور پھر ہم نوٹس کرتے ہیں کہ ٹورڈز دی اینڈ آف 19th century ایک لائنو ٹائپ پرنٹنگ مشینز جو تھیں وہ انٹروڈیوس کروائی گئیں. اب یہ بہت ایک جو لوگ اخبار کے پروسیس سے, اخبار کی پرنٹنگ پروسیس سے واقف ہیں, یہ وہ زیادہ اس میں انٹرسٹ لے سکتے ہیں. اسٹوڈنٹس آپ کا تو یہ چونکہ ٹاپک ہے. پہلے پرنٹنگ فکسڈ آپ لفظ بنا لیتے تھے, اس سے کرتے تھے. جب لائنو ٹائپ آئی تو آپ ایک پوری لائن جو آپ چاہتے ہیں پرنٹ کرنا, اس پوری لائن کو آپ کمپوز کر سکتے تھے ان میٹل اور یا جس بھی فارم میں آپ چاہتے تھے. پھر آپ پوری لائن کو کرتے تھے, پھر آپ کے پورے کالم کمپوز کر لیتے تھے, پھر آپ پورے کالم کو. یہ فیسلٹی آپ کو لائنو ٹائپ مشینوں میں دی. یہ پھر 20ویں صدی میں, 19ویں صدی کے اینڈ پہ تو یہ آئی گئی, تو پھر 20ویں صدی میں بہت لمبا عرصہ تک اخبارات جو تھے وہ لائنو ٹائپ مشینوں پہ چلتے رہے. پھر اور بھی بہت ساری باتیں ہوتی رہی, کیونکہ اخبار اب اپنی 100-150 سال پورے کر چکے تھے. تو اگین ٹوورڈز دی کلوز آف 19th century a term was introduced, yellow journalism. جرنلزم ظاہر ہے جب پرنٹنگ اخبارات آئے تو جرنلزم کا ایک پروفیشن جو تھا وجود میں آ چکا تھا. جرنلزم بائی اینڈ لارج means talking about news, discussions about news, publishing news, and concerning with news. You are writing editorials, columns about something which is happening in the world. ایک پروفیشن اس قسم کا آ گیا. اس پروفیشن میں پھر کچھ ایسے ایلیمنٹ بھی آ گئے جو کوئی بہت ہی سوسائٹی کے لیے پسندیدہ چیزیں نہیں چھاپتے تھے. تو اس سے ایک یلو, جب ہم آئیں گے اس چیپٹر پہ تو وی ول ٹاک ان ڈیٹیل, یلو چیپٹر کا وجود جو تھا وہ آ چکا تھا. اس طرح سے یہ مختلف طریقوں سے گزرا جو پریس کا زمانہ تھا. ارلی پیریڈ جو پریس کا تھا وہ اس طریقے سے گزرتا چلا گیا. اب ہم دیکھتے ہیں اسٹوڈینٹس کہ ساؤتھ ایشیا میں اخبارات کا وجود کیسے ہوا. ساؤتھ ایشیا میں جو پرنٹنگ پریس نہیں تھا, جب پرنٹنگ پریس انٹروڈیوس ہوا in the middle of 15th century, it was there in various parts of Europe, it was there in America, and it was there in Egypt. But the printing press and the printing technology was not available in South Asia before these English people who came here and set up their colony in South Asia. They were all handwritten work done, or maximum there was block printing. It was because of the English people that the printing machines and the printing process was introduced to India. And since the people have more concentrated, the foreigners, the English people, they were more concentrating on the eastern side of South Asia. So in the beginning, whatever the publication we find, they are from in the eastern part of South Asia. بنگال میں سب سے پہلے اس کا وجود ہم دیکھتے ہیں. لیکن سب سے پہلے یہ جو پبلیکیشن کا سلسلہ شروع ہوا تو کالونیل جرنلزم جس کو ہم نام دیتے ہیں کہ کالونیل جرنلزم کا کرتے ہیں, تو برٹش ایسٹ انڈیا کمپنی سے تو آپ واقف ہیں, انہی کے وہ لوگ تھے زیادہ تر جو یہاں پر تھے. پھر دے ہیو دیئر انفلوئنس اوور دا اسمال اسٹیٹس ان ویریس پارٹس آف دا سب کانٹیننٹ, اینڈ دین دیر واز ٹوٹرنگ آف دا اسٹرانگ اسٹیٹس ان انڈیا, اینڈ گریجولی the English people were able to hold at one time control over India. This is the otherwise history than the newspapers, but this is how it happened. In 1776 is the time when Mr. Bolts, there was a man after the name of Mr. Bolts who tried to brought out a paper. He was not allowed. He was the first person to make a formal application to the company to allow him to bring out a newspaper on the pattern, the way papers were brought out in UK. He was not allowed. When all it started with a rather bold man, Augustus Hickey, a name in the newspaper growth in subcontinent. No student of communication can forget. A real brave man, Augustus Hickey. He was able to bring out a publication, I would say, called Hickey's Bengal Gazette. That was in 1780. There was an attempt in 1776, and that was denied by the company. But in 1780, he was able to bring out this publication. Now again, it was not a regular publication. It didn't have a regular circulation. It's very interesting what Mr. Hickey would be doing. He would publish this gazette and some very spicy matter. Obviously, he was not happy with the company people. And he wanted to enjoy his independence. Most journalists wish for all around the world, even today. Mr. Hickey is something like 200 years ago, more than years ago, 1780. He wanted to enjoy his freedom of expression. There were no laws, there were no regular practices of giving out a newspaper. What he would be doing then, he would publish his gazette with, obviously, with some interesting matter. Generally, he would copy what he would find, the items from what's in England, ships would come, and he would get whatever had been published in the newspapers. He would pick some stories of lords and other people that may interest the people here in Bengal in those times, and then publish it. Who would buy those? Just to tell people that something new in the form of news had appeared, he would paste his paper on walls, city walls, at different places, so that people should pass by and see what's written in Hickey's Gazette today. It was not a regular publication. It would appear after a fortnight, or after a month, or then after a week or so. But what happened? As he was indulging more in publishing matter which was, by their standard, offensive matter, he was likely to be handled strongly. And strongly he was handled. He was sentenced to 4 months jail. This is the first person who brought out a paper on the Indian soil, saw this harshness in the name of this freedom of expression. He was put behind bars for 4 months for publishing something highly, as it was regarded by the company, East India Company, highly objectionable. He was then fined, students, ₹500. आप सोचते होंगे कि 500 रुपए का जुर्माना होगा, लेकिन आप ये ज़हन में रखें कि ये 18वीं सदी का आखिरी क्वार्टर है और 500 रुपए उसको जुर्माना हुआ. इसका मतलब ये था कि उन्होंने अंदाजा किया सजा देने वालों ने कि इस बंदे के पास पैसे हैं कितने. उन्होंने अंदाजा किया कि इसके पास तकरीबन इतना ही सरमाया है, 500-600 रुपए का. तो उन्होंने 500 रुपए का उसके ऊपर जुर्माना कर दिया. और उसके बाद he was so strongly hit by this fine of ₹500 in those times that actually he was totally ruined. And then he was not in a position all his life to continue publication of all these, his gazette and any other publication. So he suffered badly because of the practices which were not regular, which were not very active in laws. There was nobody to regulate publication. So this was the story of man who brought after the first regular publication, we will call it as newspaper, in the last quarter of 18th century. But he earned the name as a pioneer of journalism or newspaper in our Asia, in our Indian soil. And later on, when we begin to see happen later with him, the other person has missing in the world. And we're talking about the appearing of papers in Calcutta. आजकल शायद इसको कोलकाता they call it Calcutta. कलकत्ता से उन्होंने एक अखबार निकाला, इंडिया गazette. अच्छा, ये दोनों जो लोग, इनका ताल्लुक खासा हुकूमती लोगों से था. इनका जो ताल्लुक हुकूमत के लोगों से था, जितना ही एक आसान था, जो किसी में था, इंडिया कलकत्ता से निकली. उस पर ये हुकूमत की जो खबरें थी, जो हुकूमत की हवाले से जो बात होती थी कि मुझे करिए, उसके बारे में बात होती थी. इसको माफ करते थे. फिर इन एक खबर थे, वो सारे दो लोग आपने सुझाव दिया, उनसे एक सामने क्लिक हो गया. आपके लिए आगे बंगाली. अब देखिए अखबार के नाम से जैसे जैसे इस तरह के में जुड़ते थे नाम तो अलग नाम हर लीजिए आप एक अखबार का इंटरनेट में मुझे सकते हैं. उसके बाद फिर ओरिजिनल म्यूजियम ऑफ कैरेक्टर म्यूजियम दे मतलब नाम इस नाम के वाले एक पब्लिकेशन का पास हुआ. गेम इन कैरेक्टर इन अखबार जो हमें ज़्यादा इलेक्शन से मिली है जो तहरीक मिलती है देर ज़्यादा होते हैं बाद में था क्या इस बात में अपनी गिलस्पी छोटी छोटी चीज़ें होती थी ज़्यादा हुकूमत के लोग थे ज़्यादा आपको यही बता देते कंपनी का एक लिए कुछ अनाउंसमेंट्स होती थी लोगों के लिए इस तरह से हमें आज की लाशा है इस हवाले से अखबार इसलिए कल के बाद इसको कर रहे थे इसके जो अखबार आता है फिर समझ इसका नाम है शब्द कुछ चाहिए धीरे धीरे मैच हो गई चाहिए पहले दस्तार और आपने इंडिया के आप में जब वहाँ पे मद्रास फिर एक मद्रास कुरियर 1785 पब्लिकेशन का रिजल्ट शुरू एक के बाद एक अखबार आता है मद्रास जो थोड़ा स्ट्रॉन्ग होल्ड बन गया तरह दिल्ली न्यूज़ की आवाज़ आप ये पब्लिकेशन की हवाले से जिसको आप अखबार के जरिए कर सकते हैं इधर देश से वो लोग अखबार के नाम से दे सकते हैं कि अखबार के हाल जैसे रेड जो से ये हाल मद्रास ही अखबार मिलकर जो है वो आता उसका ये नंबर का अलग से इसमें एक बात कल से निकला मैं सुनूं कैसा बहुत सारी अखबार की प्रेशर में थी नहीं जहाँ पे मालिक बनाई हुई नाम अखबार जैसे मतलब अनिवार्य टू हैव a name same title instance just we have going to here matter in 1795 it was soon fortified of the state and India had it but continued in 1878 not as a business from 1700 the different newspapers continued coming out from Madras but they were not sustained but in 1878 a big newspaper got the Hindu there was no paper that was founded in 1878 in Madras and still this paper survived known as the fourth or fifth largest paper in India it continued then because it was working more when the Hindu came out it started publishing things concerning more about people, more about healing, more about what was going on in their time where these people assumed after what we call freedom fight of freedom war India was in. And they difficult period detailed look at the suppressed by English players. At that time, to bring out newspaper and showing out the difficulty was no small thing because they found it difficult to talk to so independently in different of the world. In those days, when English was not ready to listen to anything here opposition, the boy was in the subcontinent around Muslim and Hindus and other people. At that time, English people, the people who found the ruling party brought out the publications from in highlighting the difficulties people were bring under the Raj while in the rule of the English people. They came to Bombay. When to Bombay, on the western side of India, we find that the Bombay Herald was a publication which was seen in 1789. You see, almost the time when there were publications in Kolkata, in Madras, also have a publication in Bombay. Both in name of Bombay. All these three cities, these three great cities of South Asia, their names are mentioned. Now, Bombay saw its first paper in 1789. And by this time, there were quite a few papers all over India. And when we come to Urdu press, and when we talk about the Muslims, they are behind us. In 1822, 1822 was the time when a weekly joined appeared from the Indian soil. And soon after the Sultan, in 1850, Mushi Harsul Rai started again a weekly, not a daily, a weekly Kohinoor, and it was from home. Lahore could provide a place for people to talk out and bring out Urdu publications. But there was a concentration of newspapers in Delhi, in Lucknow, as we call it these days. And the whole was actually the song of Urdu press. And after the horse in the निकलने शुरू और ये इतनी तेजी से निकले अखबार यहाँ के रोज आएगा लॉस ये बहुत पॉपुलर लॉस निकले इसमें बहुत ज़्यादा आप मुझे पड़ी गई और लोगों की अपनी जिंदगी होती है मुख्तलिफ क्या काम कर रहे हैं देखो जब ग्रोथ कर रही है और यार जो बुक जामी उनके बारे में बात होती थी बदला मुझे चले ये अली ऑफ vernacular speech includes Urdu reading into Bengali and Gujarati and all these languages when the early part of newspapers one thing very there were no laws and code for things that were by the newspaper people what really was observed if you look through your copies of this you find that they were more personal rather than part of any national or of the area or when campaign belonging to the area or national they were more as personal facilities the people who were being about the idea heard more so the kind of personal feeling was coming to the rest और इसमें लगा कि एक हाथ उन्होंने निकाल उन्होंने हवा में दूसरे जो आइडियल ग्रुप के बारे में बहुत ही नाम दिया फिर उन्होंने अपनी के लिए और इनके बारे में बहुत सारी बातें कही if you through about this not pushing the history books in subcontinent you would find more interesting events आप मैं क्या कोई आप ये वो तरह से एक सिग्नल से ओवर और इस छोटे निकल रहा है and in the one is badly in these plain states छोटे-छोटे तो हम दे देंगे अंग्रेजों गालियां दे दी और छोटे-छोटे जागीरदार भी बना देते हैं स्टेट्स में शासन दे देंगे शायद की जिंदगी निकलती वो तरह महाल में शासन ऐसे देते हैं हालांकि हम बात करते हैं अंग्रेजों उनको आवाज के लिए बना देते हैं शासन ऐसा प्रोवाइड उनके ऊपर बेस आईसी कॉन्स्टेंट न्यूज़पेपर्स और डाली न्यूज़पेपर्स वो इस तरह बात इनके ऊपर एड्रेस करते हैं ज्यादा बड़े में हालात की बने जिसमें से कुछ गलत चलती कुछ झूठ होती है जैसे कहा लॉ ऐसे नीति गवर्न करते हैं clearly the newspaper जब आप देखिए newspapers का वजूद यहाँ as means of mass movement and means of sufficient and of newspapers sufficient when the relief of newspaper now was we from we find that newspaper is more of a personal matter bring out paper and more of a personal feeling to be a newspaper and there was internationally as well over in the case of the publication so that फिर ये मुझे उसका संजीदा था एक खबरों का ज्यादा नहीं संजीदा था निकलने हुए and in these papers northern parts of जिस बात ने बहुत ज्यादा नाम कमाया और जिस वजह से आगे साइंटिस्ट की नेशनल कमीशन सराहनीय कर जमींदार ज़िबारक पर मतलब जफर अली खान उनके हाथ से पास जाते हैं कार्य एक से सुधार जब सर्विस बड़ी कम होती थी एक से इस बार की सर्कुलेशन 30,000 तक पहुंच चुकी थी उस जमाने 30,000 की सर्कुलेशन को मेंटेन करना सब ज़िबारक पर अपने समय पर पहुंचना उन्हें बहुत सारे बात से इस्तेमाल में शुरू कर देश चुकी and instead of the director on this was changed from personally to the national and regional so as Zimina represented the voice of Indian people and there was coming very harsh on the English press it was better in the campaign and the campaign of event movement. In this movement of independence for India, Zilza was one way paper, which in fact published so much against the groups and the sentiment of people who want freedom, which is of colonial rules. And really, atrocities of English rulers on the paper like Bulgaria, different people like there was a war, they like it as the common English rule, and those nasty days, we all remember as the very hard days. So there was Arabian warfare here. خلافت پار بہت بڑا مسئلہ اجالا اور انقلاب فتح پار امرت سنگھ کا بھی بنی ویری پاپولر ہم لوگ واسطے پانی نے یہ پانی جوہر لال نہرو نے کور کیا یہ پانی میں اور اس نے بھی بہت آزادی کی حوالے سے کافی تھی انقلاب انجر یہ میگزین کا دنوں بہت پاپولر انقلاب اور یہ خبر ابھی جیسا ایک نوائر کا زمین کا پسند سے اس میں اکثر جلدی کردار ادا ہندوستان آفتاب جمہوریت سے جدید آزادی ہے یہ ان کی خبر سے اسٹوڈنٹ جس نے سائے واز میرے سائز so what's newspapers one after the other and since the time of investment the whole nation in Russia all these people Hindus Muslims Sikhs they were in fact sort of a battle against the English rule and they wanted English rulers to quit India and they hand over the people of Asia. So the newspapers had a very good day in those days because you are in a position where you are enjoying a good separation and a good command over what you are seeing and the passion you are trying to lead to. اس بارے میں دیکھتے ہیں کہ بہت سارے حوالوں سے خراج ہوتے ہیں سپریشن آپ ایک ایگزامپل کہ اسٹیٹ آف پریمیئر ان the United States these days. It's just an example to give you some idea where the newspapers have reached over these 350 years, starting from those 1690. اس وقت پیپر نکلا تھا وہاں شروع کر کے جو ریگولر پیپر نکلا جیسے ہم نے آپ سے کہا کہ نیو انگلینڈ کوریٹ 1705. Since then there is no looking back for newspapers. In fact, the newspaper industry has advanced so rapidly and now is in a position where it is a very regular organ of mass communication. There is hardly a society, students, which can live on without newspapers. You would not find any society, any civilized society, any democratic society, any country where there are no newspapers. That in fact speaks itself that how strong this organ of mass communication has, which had sustained so strongly even in the presence of the electronic media. When came radio and when came television, the newspaper industry stood firm and held its ground. And that's why it is still holding its ground, and it has employed so many people and is responsible for having jobs for people in different categories. So this much about this organ we call newspapers. In mass communication ہم نے کتابوں کے بارے میں پہلے پڑھا تھا کہ کتابوں کے بارے میں کس طرح سے ہے. آج ہم نے ایک ذرا ڈیٹیل میں دیکھا کہ اخبارات کا پھر وجود کیسے آیا اور کس طریقے سے مختلف جگہوں پہ کتاب جو تھے اخبارات جو تھے ان کی گروتھ ہوئی. اور چلتے چلتے ایک اور ٹرم لاسٹ ٹائم ہم بات کر رہے تھے سینسرشپ کی. ویسے تو وہ زیادہ سوٹ کرتا تھا کہ اس کی بات آج ہو جاتی کیونکہ اخبارات اور سینسر ان کا آپس میں بڑا چولی دامن کا ساتھ ہے. جب بھی کوئی حالات بگڑتے ہیں تو سینسرشپ جو ہے وہ اخباروں کو زیادہ ہونی پڑتی. تو جو میس کمیونیکیشن کے اسٹوڈنٹ ناؤ یو انڈرسٹینڈ واٹ سینسرشپ از. سینسرشپ جیسا ہم نے بات کی تھی کہ ٹو بین اے پرسن اور این آرگنائزیشن فرام کنٹینیوئنگ واٹ دے آر ڈوئنگ particularly in the area of freedom of expression. And today, next in line is channel. Channel, in fact, is the means for communication. When we say channel, we in fact refer to the mean of communication. ویسے تو آج کل آپ چینل کے حوالے سے بہت سارا جانتے ہوں گے جیسے ریڈیو کے چینلز ہیں, جیسے ٹیلی ویژن کے چینلز ہیں, بہت سارے چینلز ہیں. بٹ وین وی ٹاک ایز اے ٹرم ان میس کمیونیکیشن وین وی سے چینل وی ان فیکٹ آر انڈیکیٹنگ این ایریا the means of transmitting message from one point to another. Next time, with the next topic and a new term, we will be here. Till then, students, have a nice time and Khuda Hafiz.